There are a number of organisms that have remarkable structures or behaviors that are involved in finding mates and participating in sexual reproduction. Some of these are ornaments, like the bird of paradise you just saw here. Some of them are things like weapons, which males will use to spar with one another in order to compete for mates. There are even stranger behaviors, like this male praying mantis getting his head bitten off by his mate. He will continue to mate with her while he is being devoured until finally she consumes enough of his nervous system that his abdomen is unable to continue the mating process. While it seems counterintuitive, sexual selection is actually not the opposite of natural selection. It's not opposed to natural selection in any way. In fact, it's just a subset of natural selection. I usually start off my lectures on natural selection by asking students to pity the female kiwi. This is a kiwi. It's a flightless bird that runs around on the leaf litter in New Zealand. And the reason I ask students to pity the female kiwi is because of this. This is an X-ray of a female kiwi, and here you can see the egg that she is going to have to lay. The egg of a kiwi can weigh up to 1/3 of her body mass. And so if you imagine an egg 1/3 of your weight, and you have to build that egg and then lay that egg, you'll understand that the female kiwi has a pretty rough life when it comes to reproduction. In most species, it isn't quite this extreme. But in any species that reproduces sexually, there is an egg and a sperm, and the eggs are much bigger than the sperm cells. This fundamental asymmetry leads to a tremendous number of consequences that we see at the larger level when it comes to the behaviors and structures that are involved in sexual reproduction. Because it's so much easier to make sperm than it is to make eggs, there are always going to be many sperm for each egg cell. And because only one sperm and one egg cell are necessary to make a new offspring, eggs are almost always going to be the limiting factor when it comes to reproduction. Another truth about this is because eggs are the limiting factor, most females who want to reproduce get a chance to do so. And so there's not very much variation in female reproductive success. However, for males, the differences can be very great. A male who is especially successful at winning mates can have lots and lots and lots of offspring because he's not limited by the number of sperm that he can make. It's very easy to make lots and lots of sperm. So what you get is this tremendous difference between the reproductive potential, the maximum reproductive potential of males and females, and also the minimum reproductive success that both sexes sometimes enjoy. Again, we're talking about elephant seals. Down here on this graph, you can see the reproductive output, the lifetime reproductive output of a number of females. That's this black line here. So these are female elephant seals. The most successful female had 10 pups over her lifetime that made it to maturity. The least successful had 0. In contrast, take a look at what happens with males. A very successful male elephant seal can sire over 90 offspring in his lifetime. But almost all of the males in the population sire none at all. This means that there's a tremendous amount of variation in male reproductive fitness. And what that means is that there's tremendous selection pressure to be one of the few that is up here on the graph rather than one of the many that is down here. So males are under very strong selection to maximize the number of opportunities they get to mate. That leads to certain patterns that we see in males and certain patterns that we see in females. One of the outcomes that we frequently see in nature is that males will compete for opportunities to mate. Because their sperm does not limit them, because they can make enough sperm for many, many matings, what does limit the number of times that many males can mate in many species is whether or not they can force other males away from mating opportunities. Frequently what this means is that males will sport these weapons, or they will evolve to appear more intimidating to other males. Sometimes male-male competition for mates involves actual fighting. Often, as we talked about in the last lecture, conflict more often involves two individuals sort of sizing each other up and trying to figure out, if it came to a fight, which one of us would win. But weapons, particularly on males, are very common, especially among mammals. Sometimes the males simply look intimidating. Again, this is a different species of stalk-eyed fly than the one we saw last time, but these are the male's eyes. They're all the way out here on these eye stalks because I guess other stalk-eyed flies find a head that is this wide to be very intimidating. Competition between males for access to mating opportunities can be very costly. In some species like elephant seals, males can get badly hurt or killed. But even in those where there's mostly ritual combat or displays to intimidate other males, there's a considerable expense involved with competition. Displays cost a lot of energy and they use up time that could be used for doing other things like, say, gathering food. There are a number of species in which males essentially go hungry for much of the mating season because they've invested all of their time in competing for mates. This makes sense, though, from a straightforward view of these organisms. A male that does not compete for mates, does not invest heavily in competing for mates, isn't going to get the chance to reproduce. So it's not really surprising from the point of view of natural selection that males would have these adaptations. There are some features on males, though, which are a little less intuitive. And this is particularly true for males that have ornaments that are attractive to females. If you are on the savannah in Tanzania and you see these birds, these are called widow birds, and their tails are outrageously long. Researchers have shown by trimming these tails that when the tails are cut to a more normal length, these birds have a much easier time foraging, they are healthier, and they have a much easier time doing things like avoiding predators. And this isn't too surprising. These ornaments are somewhat counterintuitive because they make it more difficult for the male to make a living. And the weaponry that we saw the males use to compete can also make it more difficult for them to make a living because they're investing heavily in those structures rather than, say, keeping themselves well nourished. However, as I said earlier, sexual selection is not opposed to natural selection. It's a subset of it. Organisms need to do basically three things in order to get their genes into the next generation. First, they have to survive to sexual maturity. They have to survive to an age where they actually can reproduce. Second, they need to get the opportunity to mate. And then if they do mate, the question is, how many offspring can you make? Okay, these are basically the three things that determine how high an individual's fitness is. All of them are what's called natural selection. So natural selection is going to act to increase all three of these, to increase the odds of an individual surviving to maturity and mating, and then to increase the number of offspring that it can have when it mates. But only this middle one here, selection to increase the number of mating opportunities, only that one is referred to as sexual selection. The other two are often referred to as ecological selection. And this is usually what we think of when we think of natural selection. We think of survival and then how many offspring can you make assuming you survive. Often, traits that are favored by sexual selection make it more difficult to survive, or they may mean that you have fewer offspring when you do reproduce. So, for example, in the case of the widowbird's tail, sexual selection favors much longer tails. Ecological selection favors shorter ones.